he would free the world through the final battle in order to initiate the 1,000 years empire of peace and the return of Christ. This is how the Tula interpreted Christ's speech. In about 1,000 plus not quite 1,000 years, you will be reborn together with Elijah to free the world. He meant the 2,600 Essene followers who were Atlantean descendants. The actual prophecy was that light workers who had taken on his work would be reborn in approximately 2,000 years, together with Elijah, who at the time of Christ was John the Baptist, in order to herald the imminent return of Christ and of life itself, and to announce the end times. In this secret revelation, it was mentioned that the power would be taken out of the hands of the Hebrew Brotherhood. Jesus meant that the spiritual power would be given to another country. The German Tula Society still identified itself with the role of world savior, which could free the world of evil. This idea became the heart of its anti-Semitic teachings. When this occult sect thought it was freeing the world of Atlantean Freemasonry through the Second World War, it expected part of this secret prophecy to be fulfilled. The brother war of the two priesthood castes of Atlantis was reenacted in the Second World War through the Tula Society. The members believed themselves to be Christ's followers, fighting the battle for freedom from the Hebrew lodges. Yet these souls of the Third Reich were the other brotherhood of Babylon, which had lost power. The brothers from Agatha, who in their previous high culture in Babylon had lost against the Hebrew priesthood. The Second World War was a continuation of the Atlantean Brother War. It was karma, which is the greatest mystery, revealing that in fact the Jewish and the Germanic roles had emerged from a common Atlantean past.
The story of Agati and Shambhala is also impressively described in a novel by Russell McLeod, The Black Sun of Tashilhunpo. The novel is about the battle between these two forces. And in one part of the story, a 91-year-old former SS in Tibet tells a journalist pursuing the story how these two forces behave. He relates how Agati and Shambhala and their legend have intervened in real history.
Und erzählt ihm, wie diese Legende in die Realgeschichte eingegriffen hat.
Therefore, the Tula Society was a precursor to the original cell of the NSDAP, in actual fact, an extension of Agati. The successors of Sebottendorf, Dietrich Eckart, and in his trial Karl Haushofer, initiated Hitler into this legend. They made it clear to him that what he represented in the National Socialism was the work of Agati, and that Agati fought against its opposite Shambhala, which at the time, and even later, had primarily gathered forces in the Freemason lodges and in the organizations of the Jews. That is the story behind it all.
Churchill and Roosevelt were the leaders of the Freemason Brotherhood, and Hitler was the leader of the Tula Society and the New Templar Order. In the prophecy stating that at the time of the return of Christ, the head of the serpent would be crushed, it was not meant that the Freemasons and the Illuminati would be violently destroyed. On the contrary, it meant that through the return of the inner cosmos, the Christ powers would depossess the world powers through the overcoming of polarity in man. When the Eagle, that is the Space Brothers, has landed, there will be no world powers left, because from then on, there will only be ascended and conscious beings on Earth. They will have lived through the resurrection and will be connected to their inner truth. The return of Christ, thus, is the revelation of the planetary spirit in man, out of which he can read the whole truth himself, and thus we can perhaps only guess that the apocalypse to a great extent will take place in the mind of people and only partially in the outside world. The true light children and Christ followers were to be born much later, and their mission is more healing of the earth through the overcoming of polarity than the waging of wars. The Tula organization believed then that the new golden age had already started, and that Elijah and the great Atlantean souls had already been born to release the world from the dark forces. When Dietrich Eckart von Sebottendorf and his followers consulted several spiritual mediums, the name of the young officer Adolf Hitler was mentioned to them through the astral world.
The fact that Hitler was to be a kind of Messiah who would free the world from the Jews and from the dark forces is indisputably the direct experience in National Socialism. He himself surely also had this experience of being the chosen one. He repeatedly spoke of providence, by which he was guided. At the end, he was not happy with providence, and he said that providence could not take responsibility towards the German nation of Germany losing the war. This is indeed a strange thing. But before that, he undoubtedly felt called upon, that is, chosen by providence, to play a fundamental role in the world history and to free the world from the Jews and thus from the lower human beings. Dietrich Eckart was somebody who had a strongly anti-materialistic disposition. Actually, he drew his worldview from the spiritual. He was influenced by Schopenhauer and by a medieval mystic by the name of Angelus Elesius, who lived in the 13th and 14th century. He was inclined towards spirituality in literature and in his own experiences. He rejected materialism. He saw the people who were gaining influence in Germany and those in power as symbols for materialism. On the one hand, they were the Marxists, and on the other, of course, the liberal bourgeois and the capitalists.
Und auf der anderen Seite natürlich die bürgerlich-liberalen und der Kapitalismus.
These spiritual ideas by which Eckart had been strongly shaped were surely passed on to his pupil, Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler's occult past already began during his years of study in Vienna. He read Nietzsche's Superhuman, Übermensch, studied the secret teachings of Helena Petrova Blavatsky, the secret revelations of John, and regularly attended the lectures of Guido von List. He was definitely a subscriber to the occult magazine published by Lanz von Liebenfels, which already glorified the racist madness, the male sun cosmologies, and Aryan culture. He found the climax of his spiritual ego in the legends of the Nibelungen sagas. In Vienna, his desire already took shape to release the world from dark forces as the Germanic Messiah. The first meeting between the Tula organization and Hitler took place when the Tula organization, together with the officers of the Volunteer Corps, drove the communists out of Munich. Hitler was informed about his specific destiny and firmly believed himself to be the reincarnated leader from Atlantis. The aims of this sect were obviously kept silent. Hitler was worshipped as Elijah. His salute, also called Ave, is a greeting of the gods. The swastika was the reversed symbol of Atlantis. If the swastika is turned anti-clockwise, it means the resurrection of souls, the ascension into the golden age. Turning the swastika clockwise means the descent of souls into the dark ages. Germany Awake was written on every banner, the sentence supposedly an awakening call towards a new golden age. The Tula organization wanted to bring about, by force, the resurrection of Atlantis and the 1,000 years empire foretold by Christ. No wonder they used the sign of the descent into the Dark Age. Adolf Hitler was adored as a savior by 50 esoteric groups and brought to power. No one could imagine that he himself was one of the last masters of the Dark Brotherhood of Atlantis, who would lead it to the dark side of occultism. For the first time during the modern era, an esoteric sect came to power, with all its divisions and various branches. The sole objective of this sect, who practiced secret occultism and mass magic, and lived in its own reality, was to take power from another esoteric sect, which has held the world power in its hands until this very day, the Freemasons and the Illuminati.
When the international Jewish financial structure is again successful in plunging the nations in Europe and outside into another world war, then this will not be a victory for the Jews, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe.
Surely it is no coincidence that both the Germanic and the Freemason lodges, which both believed themselves to be chosen by God to lead mankind, were in fact the misleading seducers rather than the chosen ones. And looking behind the scene, one will discover that both forces were in fact the ancient currents of the occult Atlantean War, reincarnating once more as opposing brotherhoods, accusing each other of practicing black magic. The ancient war between Shambhala and Agartha, representing opposing brotherhoods from Atlantis, reached its climax on the outside with the outbreak of the Second World War. And once again, mysterious brotherhoods established all this in Munich through the Tula Society. Von Solotten was initiated by the Turkish Freemasonry, and Karl Haushofer by the Japanese royal court, which he had visited before the First World War. It was their sole intention to enter the political scene, and when the occultists actually got into the leading positions, the Tula Society was dissolved, and a much more secret circle of the Tula was formed. It was this circle which years before the beginning of the war undertook secret expeditions in search of the mysterious high civilizations of Shambhala and Agartha in the center of the earth.
During the UFO Congress put on by Mikhail Hesselman at that time, and Finnish national TV was there, and they asked me to speak about Hitler and the Third Reich and his association with UFOs and the extraterrestrials. So I agreed to do it, after giving them some basic background on my knowledge of ufology. And of a sudden, and I mean this, of a sudden came through my mouth a quotation and a statement that alarmed me, as it did the cameramen and everybody else listening to it. They asked me, as an example, they asked me, was Hitler involved with the ETs in terms of biological research? And what came out of my mouth was simply this: yes, indeed, he was, but not like most people thought he was. He indeed was involved with them, and I went on to tell them that Hitler had made a pact or an agreement with the extraterrestrials. The extraterrestrials first approached him, as they later did the United States, and they said, look, if you let us use your people as biological research entities, or EBs, we will give you the technology to win the war. Hitler says, that's fine, but I will not let you use the Aryan race. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll let you use all my prisoners, and you can use them unlimitedly to be your biological research entities. Now that also points up, and I think clarifies, many of the enigmas and puzzles that surround, for instance, the disappearance of people from Buchwald and some of the other places that later became history. Those people actually went to the ETs to be used as their biological research entities.
Even the Second World War may have been planned or masterminded by the Freemasons and Illuminati, and the opposition financed by their manipulation of capital. Or were the guardians